Thanks so much. I hope you can hear me at the back. If not, we can turn the volume up a bit. And there's a disclaimer that having said that since I changed my new diet, I never get colds or ill. The last 2 weeks I've been struck down by a deadly virus. I'm feeling better, but my voice isn't, and I will cough. So they'll have to edit this out of the podcast to make me sound super healthy. Okay, so anyway, with that, I'll get on the main event and tell you about the diet myth. Now, before I do, just some preamble that my day job is as director of the Twins UK registry here at King's, which I've been running for 23 years, which has 12,000 twins in it and has enabled us to sort out nature v nurture for hundreds of different diseases and find genes for hundreds of different conditions. And it's not the largest twin registry in the world, but it's the most deeply phenotyped and studied, so that each individual has had about £25,000 spent on them in clinical and biological tests. So these are the most studied people on the planet, and having this as my database in my backyard, if you like, has enabled me to take on new projects like looking at microbes from this superb base, and I couldn't have done it without the support of all these, the twins who continue to help us in these studies, and of course the team of 70 scientists who support that in my department. But why, of all the things I could study, have I got into this particular area? Because we did study diet, and I was quite interested that certain bits of our diet are actually under genetic control, whether we like greens or broccoli, whether we like kimchi, garlic, bitter beer rather than lager, junk food or tofu. All these things have a slight genetic influence. And I was intrigued about that as my initial starting point. But the key for me came 5 years ago at the top of this mountain in the Italian Alps at about 3,000 meters, where we'd been having a week of ski touring, which is a tough form of exercise where you climb up for 5 or 6 hours on skins to the top of a hill and then ski back down again. Seems a bit pointless to some people, but others it's actually good fun. And I was struggling a bit more than usual on this last day, and it was a bit foggy and I wasn't seeing well, and I was falling over, and I got to the bottom and I realized I had double vision. And as a doctor I knew that's not a good thing. There's not many good causes of double vision. And I spent the next few weeks in a very stressful, traumatic time having scans and investigations. And at the end of it, I ended up finding out that I had a short-term vascular occlusion that would get better after a couple of months, but my blood pressure had gone up and I was suddenly on lots of tablets. So I went, like many people, from thinking they were a healthy middle-aged man to suddenly a patient just like all the people I've been treating. And this was a bit of a shock, and I decided I didn't want to take all these tablets. I wanted to see what else I could do with lifestyle, as many people do, and lose some weight and go on a healthy diet. And I thought, as someone who's been studying obesity genetics for 20 years, done epidemiology, has a wide-ranging knowledge as a physician, this can't be that difficult. And I was completely wrong. Everywhere I looked, I found dogma, fallacies, and myths. And this idea that it's all about calories, and doctors have been telling patients for years that simple to diet, lose weight, all you got to do, eat less calories, expend more calories by exercise. that rule has gone around the world, and what's happened around the world, rates of obesity have tripled in every single country where doctors spout out this rubbish. And they're just saying, well, it's all, people's willpower, it's not my fault. And yet this is happening in babies. Can't blame them for lack of willpower. Other dogmas, all calories are equal. Doesn't matter really. Calorie counting is the way to sort this out. One diet fits all. All these things are tried and tested, and the reason it's not working is not our fault. And increasingly you still see things like avoid high-fat foods, eat starchy foods instead on the government current guidelines that we see. And other things like don't skip meals, graze all the time, that's the perfect way to health. So, I got increasingly confused and rather angry at what was going on, and that's the point at which I said, I'm going to study this, understand it more, and if I'm lucky, I'll get a book out of it as well. Now, the other obvious thing, not coming necessarily from the medical profession, but coming from the public, was this idea that all our ills, all our problems of our epidemic of obesity and our lack of ability to follow things is because we should just need to exclude one thing from our diet. If we do that, everything else will fall into place. And there are hundreds of extremely well-written, extremely persuasive books telling you that get rid of gluten, get rid of grains. We didn't have it before 9,000 years ago. That's the cause of our problems. Get rid of that. Get rid of any saturated fat. That's bad, so get rid of oils and things like that. Others will say, get rid of dairy. No, they didn't. They said, get rid of carbohydrates, because they're refined carbohydrates. They're the evil thing. Cut them out. Get rid of milk, because we're not meant to drink milk. It gives us all horrible allergies and inflammation that causes obesity. Get rid of fructose, orange juice. That's deadly. Get rid of the milks. Get rid of cheese, because we know that's full of fat and also allergenic. Get rid of red meat. Red meat is the cause of all evil. Get rid of red meat. Vegetarians live longer, so red meat, get that out. All you're left with is a bit of kale and some vitamin tablets. No one's got anything bad to say about them, but it's not really a sustainable diet. And that's where we've got, by following these gurus telling us all of these things, the end result is we have a totally non-diverse diet that's confusing everybody, and none of them are particularly sustainable. So the other big myth, as I alluded to, is this idea about fat. And I was told as a medical student that fat is bad, and it certainly got very bad. Whoever does the PR for fat certainly should lose their job. They should have changed their name ages ago to lipids, because being fat and related to fatness is obviously extremely bad commercial opportunity. So, and yet, even in the current guidelines, we're still saying the evidence shows that fat is bad for you. And I'm convinced that that is absolutely not true. The evidence does not show that. Countries that actually eat double the amount of fat, like in southern Greece and southern Mediterranean as we do, have much lower rates of heart disease and live longer. But the key is not these observational studies, which are flawed. It's a randomized controlled trial where large groups of people are allocated to one to another. And the Spanish government, to their credit, sponsored a very large study of 7,000 60-year-old Spanish men and women who were overweight. They were at risk of diseases, but they didn't actually have them. And many of us are in that category. And they said, you've got to follow this diet for 7 years, and we want to either you take the low-fat diet as prescribed by every major government group in Europe and in the US, and all the cardiologists and margarine companies and low-fat yogurt companies. And we'll also have extra fruits and vegetables, so it's not totally unhealthy, but it's going to be low-fat, and the contrast will be the old-fashioned 1960s Mediterranean diet, which was high-fat, which was extra virgin olive oil, extra nuts and seeds, high-fat cheese, yogurt, plus fruits and vegetables, a little bit of meat, a little bit of fish, a lot of variety, but masses of fat. Okay, and after 5 years of this study, which remarkable for a diet study to last that long, the ethics committee shut down the study because there were a third more cases of stroke, heart disease, diabetes, and breast cancer in the low-fat group compared to the Mediterranean high-fat group. And this should have been the death knell of the low-fat diet for everyone except that 1% of people that have a genetic predisposition with very high hyperlipidemia levels. But it hasn't. It's very hard. People just keep repeating these falsehoods and hope that eventually it will become true. And now, the elephant in the room, and the reason perhaps we've got this confusion about our diets and why things don't fit into these nice patterns, is we've been ignoring something very crucial. And that is another organ inside us, a forgotten organ, which is our gut microbiome. So inside us all are 100 trillion microbes. That's roughly 10 times more than you have cells in your body. And it means that we're only 10% human, in a way. These are bacteria, these are archaea, these are fungi, these are viruses, huge numbers of them, all with, they've all little machines. They've got their own genes. They have 150 times more genes than we have, all producing different chemicals and enzymes. And all of us have a unique fingerprint. Now, you only share about 20% of your microbes with each other. And this unique fingerprint follows you through life. It may change a little bit, but forensically, even in 20 years' time, I'll know if you've been sitting on that seat or not. Because we can now measure with genetic sequencing methods precisely what those species are. And it's the genetic breakthroughs that allowed us to study microbes properly for the first time just in the last few years. Because we can tell what those species are, and rather than focusing, as many of you did in the old days, on the pathogens, where you could culture them, we've been ignoring all the good guys, all the good microbes that are 99.9% of them. So that's the important thing we're understanding, that the vast majority of microbes are there to help keep us alive. We can't exist without them. We can't develop an immune system, we can't develop a normal brain, and we can't digest our food properly. We need 25% more food just to keep going. So these things are absolutely crucial, and unlike our genes, which we share 99.5% or 99.9% of DNA with each other, we have this unique difference, which could explain why we respond to diets so differently. And I can tell a lot more about you with a poo sample than I can with a DNA sample, which is counterintuitive. But it's much more telling about what your current state of health and your prediction. Now, we studied these microbes in the twins, and what people often don't realize is that when you start life, you're pretty much sterile. All mammals start life sterile. And it's the birthing process that seeds us all, gives us our little microbe pack that lasts us the rest of our life. And it's the mothers, through the birth canal, all the mucky bits from the bowel, the vagina, and the bladder, all those microbes are coming out at exactly the right time to rub against the baby's face, and they get implanted into our intestines. And that's how the vast majority of us got microbes which resemble our mothers. And that's the way it's been going on for millions of years in every type of mammal. And it's crucial that you get these microbes because it helps you break down breast milk and it helps your immune system. Now, modern medicine has changed this. How? The caesarean section. Used to be rare until very recently, but now 24% of babies are delivered in this country by caesarean section, or about 50% in Kensington. That's not as bad. 80% in Rome, 60% in Puerto Rico, 55%, 60% in Brazil. Poor countries. You know, it's all about stretch marks and bikini lines and making sure the obstetricians can still get their golf tee on time on a Saturday. And the difference is that babies born by caesarean section have only have no resemblance to their mothers in terms of the microbes. Their microbes resemble whichever nurse picked them up first, the skin of that nurse. I was delivered by caesarean section, so I'm still trying to find my birth mother. It's a bit of a worry. It could explain a lot. So the first 3 years of life are crucial. Most twins end up being quite similar, and our twin study did actually show, like most things, that there is a small genetic component to the microbes. So it means that the reason you guys are different is partly due to the fact that you have different genes, and that attracts different microbes. It's like having a different soil. And that could explain a lot of these differences in our diets and other things. And so as well as finding there was a heritability for the first time in this twin study, we also looked at obesity and showed there were certain microbes that were associated with being fat or being thin. And we found one particular one that came out every time as being nearly always absent in fat people and nearly always present in skinny people. And that was something called Christensenella, which no one ever heard of, totally unknown microbe. We'd have ignored it in the past. But when you took this Christensenella from the skinny people and you put it into mice who were genetically identical, you could stop them getting fat. So it was a fat-busting microbe, as the tabloids called it, and we still don't know exactly how it works, but you can buy it on the internet from Japan and sprinkle it on your cornflakes. I'm not saying I agree with that, but we need to do much more work and work out how we can cultivate these protective ones. Because in general, for the obesity microbes we're finding, there are many others like this, and they tend to be the protective ones. So rather than thinking of them as a nasty thing that causes a disease, the more you have of these, the more you might be protected. So this one slide really covers all the microbiome studies that have been done. Microbiome is the community of microbes. And what it's showing is that if you have a disease, whether it's obesity, diabetes, allergies, autism, or any autoimmune disease, colitis, then you have a disrupted microbiome. It looks like this Texas backyard next to a nuclear power station. Very devoid of any great nice-looking soil, and only a few species, and weeds can flourish at will. Whereas all the healthy people in these studies resemble these perfect English gardens that I know many of you have at home, full of different vibrant species, all working together, producing a whole variety of different plants at different stages, interacting with each other, and with a rich soil full of microbes, etc., that prevent weeds forming. And this is the difference between the high diverse and the low diverse one, that I just want to keep that garden analogy in your heads. Now, microbes produce about at least 25% of all our vitamins. And they also produce other metabolites and things like brain chemicals like serotonin that make us difference between anxious and depression. But how many people here take a multivitamin on at least a weekly basis? Don't be shy. About 40% of you, I'd guess. It's about 50% in the general population, and you're probably underestimating it in case I'm saying there's something bad about it. So all the studies have shown, and there have been meta-analyses and observational studies and randomized controlled trials, that people who take regular multivitamins are more likely to die of cancer and heart disease. So sorry about that. If you're taking it for very good reasons, because people like to take vitamins. It's the opposite of the fat PR people. Whoever invented the name vitamin absolutely got it right. All my patients won't take drugs, but they'll take any amount of vitamins. And generally with only a few exceptions, there are virtually no vitamins that have survived a randomized controlled trial, or food supplements like fish oils. So there's a lot of hype, there's a huge lobbying industry behind it. Reality is they don't work, and increasingly there's evidence that they're dangerous. Now, one of the reasons I think this could be is that it's different to take a vitamin in its chemical form than in a food form. One study looked at broccoli and its active ingredient, sulforaphane, and they gave a randomized trial. Some people actually had the broccoli in measured amounts, the others had the extracted chemical, and there was a huge difference between the two in the bioavailability. So it could be that giving ourselves these big boluses of these chemicals, calling them vitamins, and hoping they work in a nice, friendly way, is actually doing the opposite and upsetting our microbes, and we're not used to having that volume delivered to it in that way. So I would go home, clear out that bathroom cabinet, and get yourself and your family to start eating real food as a source of vitamins instead. Cheese. Anyone here been told by their doctor not to eat high-fat cheese? Few of you. Okay. Now the French have double the amount of cheese per day that we do, and annoyingly, they have less heart disease. They're real big cheese eaters, and there are lots of other examples like that. And the epidemiology studies actually support the fact that cheese eating regularly gives you less heart disease and metabolic problems, despite the high saturated fat content of these. And these are 3 unpasteurized French cheeses that I took it upon myself when I was writing the book to self-experiment and went on an intensive French cheese diet, which I was allowed some red wine and yogurt and the odd cracker and a bit of apple to go with it. But that was my 3-day diet, and day 1 was fantastic. I loved it. I said, I'm going to be on this forever. Day 2, not so sure. Day 3, I really had enough. So, like all good things, you can have too much. And I was looking to see if it changed my microbes. And it didn't change it that much, because these are just passengers going through us. Okay, they have a good effect while they're there. They don't totally change the other microbes that are there, if the other microbes are healthy. But in each grain of cheese you pick up, there are literally billions of microbes. So they're live. They're full of life. And it's not just bacteria and archaea, but you also got viruses. And in the blue veins of blue cheeses, you've got masses of fungi. So you think about Stilton and Roquefort, that is a combination of fungi and microbial colonies living together. then on the crust of these cheeses, you've got all kinds of extra microbes mixed in, because that's the way they give them their flavour. If you go to these artisanal cheese places, they get a smelly rag off the floor, which is dipped in a bit of old milky stuff that's been there for about 10 years. And they smear the cheeses on it as they mature. And in some places, they used to use a bit of horse urine, but not in my cheeses. And this gives it extra flavour. In addition to that, on some cheeses, particularly mature cheddars and others, you have these little cheese mites, which burrow into the cheese itself, and they're quite tasty because they are just cheese balls, really. But it does upset some vegetarians. So don't look too carefully at your cheese, is my advice. Anyway, after my cheese diet, I was ready for another challenge. So I said, okay, let's do something really unhealthy. Let's go and do a supersize me experiment, 10 days of McDonald's. So I was all geared up for this. I wouldn't say looking forward to it, because I'm not a big fan. But I said, it's bound to change my microbes. But then fortune played a part, and another person came along who was better qualified than me. He loved McDonald's. He was hard up for cash. And he also happened to be my son. So Tom here, who was a student, signed up straight away, said this is fantastic. All his student mates were very jealous that Dad was going to pay for all these McDonald's. He had to eat every meal there, and he was only allowed a bit of variety between chicken McNuggets and a Big Mac. Had to be always with fries and Coke. And very soon he dropped the breakfast. And he was very happy. After day 3, though, he said, look, do I really need to do 10 days? Not sure about this. I said, yeah, this is for science. I'll try not to kill you, but we're going to get some good stuff out of this. But by day 10, he'd certainly had enough. And his limited studying powers became even more deprived. And his skin took on a sickly pallor. But what was worse was what happened inside him to his microbes. We were testing his microbes, and he'd lost 40% of the diversity of his microbes during this time. And this was a shock even to me. I hadn't expected anything quite so dramatic. And we're trying to explain why this was, because we're all told junk food's bad, but why is it bad? Is it just the fat and the sugar? But we all eat fat and sugar. So one theory was it's the high fat and sugar telling the brain that it's full, and the microbes literally starving because they exist on fiber. They exist on hard-to-digest foods, and nothing was getting through. There was nothing in what he was eating containing fiber apart from that little bit of gherkin that most kids just throw out immediately. So fiber could be the cause of it, but it also, all processed foods, not just McDonald's, contain emulsifiers. If you read the back of packets, you see it ubiquitously everywhere. It's in things like mayonnaise, it's in things like ketchup. It binds rubbish foods together and gives it a good quality. And this has been shown to be very bad for our gut microbes. Maybe it sticks them together, they can't function normally, they produce pro-obesogenic chemicals and metabolites. So they could be doing that. And as well as that, we know that preservatives are bad, and artificial sweeteners do the same thing. So all these chemicals in the food could be, although doing the damage, although our food testing authorities say they are safe, because the old traditional way of food testing is you give massive amounts to a rat and see if it gets liver cancer. But I think we need to really look beyond that now and take this much more seriously. So I've told you all the bad things that can happen. How can you sort of improve your gut microbes, your gut health? Well, greens is an obvious one, but unlike a 5 a day, it's not just drinking 5 glasses of Tango. It's high fiber. Root vegetables are probably the best things to eat for your microbiome. Things that contain the type of fiber like inulin. And we're talking, the best ones are chicory roots, which are very difficult to find. But then you've got Jerusalem artichokes, also known as fartichokes, for obvious reasons. Really high amounts of inulin in a very small amount. Then you've got globe artichokes as well, which are unrelated species, but also very high in fiber. And you've got leeks, onions, garlic, a lot of things that are in the Mediterranean diet anyway. Plus all root vegetables are pretty good. So then you've got nuts and seeds. Now we've all been told, don't have peanuts, full of cholesterol. The opposite is true. Turns out even peanut butter may have some health qualities, which is frightening. And in the Predimed study, the Spanish one I told you about, they did some sub-studies and showed there were real benefits of having extra nuts and seeds every day, a variety of them. So this is a really healthy snack, not a bad one as we've been told. Now, the reason they're good is not only the fiber, but also polyphenols. You might have heard of polyphenols. They're sometimes called flavonoids. The terms are used in an overlapping way, and they are antioxidants. They're also referred to as antioxidants. We've never known why they work, but it turns out they are the best food for your microbes. So anything with polyphenols is good. The microbes convert that into short-chain fatty acids, which helps damp down our immune systems. So that's really the key, and by following polyphenol foods, you can't go far wrong. And extra virgin olive oil has about 50 or 60 polyphenols in it. Only the high quality stuff. Don't go stingy and get only the virgin. It's got to be the extra virgin that's good. Red wine. The big controversy, the government trying to make us drink less, but the evidence, irritatingly for the government, still keeps showing there's a slight benefit of modest drinking. The reason red wine has 109 polyphenols, and it's this mix, particularly when you ferment stuff, that could be important. Not so much the alcohol, but it's that converted group of chemicals. White wine, nearly as good, but unfortunately, the gin and tonic doesn't really work. Then you've got coffee. We've been told coffee's bad, drink too much, gives you heart disease. You know, it may do if you drink about 20 cups and you've got a heart condition. But the epidemiology suggests that up to 8 cups a day for most people is actually beneficial for your heart. The reason, again, very high in polyphenols. Unlike black tea, for the British tea, has much less. Green tea is pretty good. Okay, so force yourself to have coffee for your health. And you can also force yourself to have dark chocolate. But sadly, you've got to throw away the Cadbury's dairy milk. With only around 23% cocoa, it's worthless and just going to give you diabetes. So you've got to up the cocoa content, get used to that cultural change, the bitter chocolate, have a few cubes of that, and you won't go far wrong. Now, you're a healthy crowd, I can tell. How many of you have regular yogurt at least 3 times a week? Wow, look at that. You see, and you don't mind admitting to that. So, and anyone here have kefir? Well, not bad. Kombucha? Getting a bit obscure here. And kimchi. Kimchi, Korean sauerkraut, if you like. So these are all fermented foods. And increasingly we're seeing that they are potentially very beneficial. But if we look at the hard evidence about probiotics, we can see that the people that benefit most from probiotics tend to be rodents. So in all the studies done, for every disease, they're good at preventing it or curing it. In humans, the story is much less clear, partly because the regulations prevent, the regulations want companies that make probiotics to do pharmaceutical studies which cost hundreds of millions of pounds. They can't afford to do that, so they do small little studies which aren't really satisfactory. And they're not allowed to make health claims. But the evidence is pretty clear that they do work if you are very young or very elderly. So when your microbiome is perhaps at its weakest, they do work. They also work when you're trying to prevent side effects of antibiotics. So that's been pretty much established. For the normal person trying to get themselves healthier, the jury's still out. And it could be that for most of the probiotics we have, particularly yogurt just has a few microbes in it, and most of the manufactured ones are just having a few strains which have been patented for 50 years. And they might suit some people and not others, because as I said, we're all very different. So the idea that sprinkling just a couple of microbes onto your several thousand is always going to make a consistent difference might be a bit naive. So I think as we look towards combining these and experimenting more with more complex fermented foods, we're going to improve that situation. How about intermittent fasting? Anyone here given that a try? Yeah? Did it work for most of you? At least for a bit? And I think it's very big in this country. Hasn't taken off as much elsewhere. And Michael Mosley's theory, which, although he's largely abandoned it, but in his book he thought this was a hormonal effect. Insulin growth factor was the reason. But it worked so well. Now, what we know is that a lot of animals fast, and most humans fast for religious reasons. It's been in our history, if you like. We've only recently given it up. Boa constrictors fast in between eating pigs for about 3 weeks. And some intrepid people who followed boa constrictors around collecting their poo worked out that their microbes change dramatically when they're in a fasting state. And the same thing happens to hibernating animals and also to us overnight. Every night we have at least a 12-hour fast. We don't die for a hypoglycemic attack and need a Twix. So what's happening in us is our microbes are basically coming out of the woodwork, because there are certain ones that love it when there's no food coming down, and they eat our gut lining. Akkermansia is one, and this has a great stimulating effect on our immune system and keeps our gut lining in really good state. So to me, it's looking like the more we do this type of intermittent fasting and the more we compress our meals, the healthier our guts are going to be. Now, there's some evidence of this because, again, another dogma, don't skip meals, and a particularly British dogma is breakfast is the best meal of the day, only idiots would skip it. It's bad for your health. We've all heard that, right? Fat people skip breakfast, look at them. Totally false, because basically fat people are skipping breakfast to try and get slimmer because they're already fat. Randomized controlled trials, 6 of them have now shown not only there's no bad effect of skipping breakfast and having exactly the same amount of calories as someone who had it, but in 5 out of the 6 they showed a reduction in weight, even if having the same calories during the day. So this fallacy that we have to be eating all the time, otherwise we faint and we get hypos and our glucose levels go all up, is rubbish. I think we were designed to have 1 or 2 meals a day. And remember that breakfast is a Victorian invention, or actually probably invented by Mr. Kellogg. Before that, we didn't really have breakfast. So just think again. I'm not saying everyone should do this. Some people are morning people. I actually like breakfast. But we shouldn't be constrained by what we're told. Now, The reason for these big changes, the reason for our epidemic in obesity, could be traced to our lack of diversity of our microbes. Studies show that we have a third less microbe diversity than our ancestors, based on hunter-gatherer tribes like the Hasda in Tanzania, who basically eat seasonally. And they will be opportunistic and eat whatever animal or plant is around. And they will have over 500 to 600 species of plants and animals over a year. The average Briton probably has 20 to 30 species, despite going into Waitrose and seeing an array, a huge array. We tend to focus in and get rather boring in our tastes. And people who have processed food or junk food may have less than 10, because processed foods are mainly based on just 6 ingredients. All of them sponsored by the government or the EU to keep them cheap and lacking in diversity and lacking in any nutrients. Antibiotics. Has anyone here never had an antibiotic? No one's too shy about that. One person who thinks they haven't, okay? You're very unusual, and I hope you're right. It's hard to be sure these days. Each time you take an antibiotic, and the average 20-year-old Briton has had 18 courses of antibiotics, average 3-year-old 2.5 courses, average. So some are on the other extreme, having 10 times that amount. We're massively overusing them. Each time it's like an atomic bomb going off in your guts. Maybe you had to survive one bomb by hiding in the crevices, and we think that's where the appendix is for. It's where the microbial species can hide in times of bad infections or nasty toxins. But you keep dropping that bomb, and eventually the microbes will give up the ghost and change. And that's where we get these other nasty conditions like Clostridium difficile and potentially other problems. And we know that epidemiologically, people that take regular antibiotics are more likely to get fat. 80% of antibiotics sold around the world and in Europe, where do they go? Farming. Why do they use it? Because it makes their animals fatter, quicker, gives them more meat, and it stimulates growth. They use it in very small amounts, and this has now been banned for the last few years in Europe, not in the US yet, but they get around it. Rates of antibiotic use have not dropped because farmers will treat one little chicken or one cow in a herd because they say, preventive. I saw a bit of an infection on the ear and I had to treat the whole lot. So they're routinely given antibiotics because that feeds them up, gets them fatter. And that means that gets in our food supply. That means that some of it, small amounts, are in our water supply, in our soil, and a lot of mouse experiments have shown that even tiny amounts of antibiotics can make mice fatter and change their responses to things and immune responses. So I think we could do a lot better in this, given that most of them are used unnecessarily. But what do you do if you've tried all these things, you have this pure life, you're surrounded by yogurts and kale smoothies, and your guts are still bad. You feel they're still toxic, and you're one of these people with one of these bad diseases. Well, how do you have like a new lawn? Can you just relay that lawn somehow? How do you have a microbial makeover? And the way you can do this now is through these capsules. Take 30 of these will give you a new microbiome. This is the modern way to do it, and what we experts call frozen poo from a healthy donor. The Americans have coined this crapsules. But this picture is a lot better than the one I would have shown you a year ago, which involves magic mix and a lot of plastic tubes. Your imagination can work out the rest. And there are DIY methods on the internet for those who are really keen. This sounds like a joke. It's not. There are 500 centers in the US offering this procedure. And it's been approved by NICE and approved by the NIH as the #1 treatment for recurrent C. diff infection. Has a 90% success rate compared to 25% of intravenous antibiotics. Sadly, we're not doing much of this in this country. There's only 6 or 7 centers doing a handful of these. So you're very unlikely to get it at the moment until we start changing this mentality. But moving on from C. diff infections, there's a study just came out, announced this week, treating colitis and using 4 different donors, putting those in and getting really significant remission rates for colitis. So you think about also that, it could be used to treat obesity, diabetes, and many other conditions. But before you get too carried away, just remember that a couple of the recipients have complained that they put on 15 kilos after getting it because the donor was a bit on the chubby side. Because obesity is now an infectious disease. And a similar note of caution, we know from animal experiments that you can transmit anxiety and neuroses in the same way from these brain chemicals from the microbes. So you want to make sure that your healthy donor is not an axe murderer. But when you're severely ill, these things, aren't as important as if you're taking it just for being a bit on the chubby side. So to summarize, if you use this analogy for yourself, and perhaps I think we could use it for educating other people, that we all have a unique soil. We need to take care of it. We need regular natural fertilizers such as fiber, prebiotics, regular seeds, probiotics, sprinkling them on. Variation experiment with seasons and with natural nutrients, avoiding toxins, avoiding processed foods and pesticides. And above all, we need to focus, and there's one word, I'd say it's diversity. And these are some of the actions we could discuss in the Q&A. And I think there are lots of things we can do, and some of this can be used educationally, to tell a kid, why should you be eating broccoli, rather than just, it's good for you. It's good for your microbes. You've got animals inside you trying to grow them. But the other thing also is, another take-home message is, with 100 trillion microbes inside it, you're never going to die alone. Now, I'll leave you with the fact that I've been running this crowd-funded program called British Gut for the last year. We've now got 2,000 people signed up, and I hope some of you might want to sign up to test your own microbes. It's done as a not-for-profit organization, and all the results are shared by all scientists. And you get a profile of yourself after a few months and can compare it to Americans. So far, the British guts are pretty bad, but at least we're better than the Americans. And they're also we're investigating setting up commercial companies that might work with dietitians as well to do this kind of thing. So on that note, hopefully you'll sign up and I'll take any questions. Thank you. So, yeah, try and grab a wave at a microphone, and when you've got one, just shout.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. You mentioned artificial sweeteners. What's your view on refined sugar and the use of that in almost every food that you eat, whether it's from supermarkets or restaurants? It's very difficult to find sugar-free food.
Yes, I mean, that's a bigger problem. And I discuss in the book how I changed my breakfast based on this idea that all this healthy muesli and granolas and whatever I was having, plus some of the fruit yogurts and Tropicana orange juice, contained masses of sugar that I wasn't aware of. I think that's generally bad for us, but in terms of microbes, there's no real evidence they directly influence that, other than because they're absorbed much earlier on. If you combine foods with sugar, so if you put natural yogurt with lots of sugar in it, it will suppress the microbes. So it's generally not a good idea because sugar is itself an antibacterial. But we need to do much more work to work out the interaction between all these particular groups.
Over here, Tim, thank you very much for that. That's very stimulating. I wonder if we could just come back to the question of what is a normal or healthy gut flora. Because I think we come away with the impression that it's the more diverse it is, the better. But of course, it is said that 50% of the gut flora has never been cultured. So we have actually quite a long way to go, except the identification on DNA basis. And if you take certain areas like the oral cavity, for instance, it's quite, people have their own distinct flora, and it's actually quite difficult to get other flora to take. And probably everybody in this room has done that experiment of eating salad in the summer, and salads, of course, are covered in dilute feces. And if you sample everybody the next day, you see lots of E. coli, but 24 hours later, it's all gone. So one might be slightly skeptical about the veracity of taking extra bacteria, which have to pass through the stomach, of course, which have got to compete with a resident flora, which actually might be quite stable.
Yeah, I think it comes back to this idea that, I mean, there are some microbes that, like probiotics, aren't meant to take seed themselves. They're just there for a few days. They might reproduce a bit, but they're not going to be permanent residents. But we believe that they have a functional knock-on effect on the other microbes. So it's not just the presence of the microbes, but it's also their function. So there's that other element to it. But you are right, and the different body parts or sites do have different correlations to their diversity. So this diversity idea is certainly true in the gut as it being healthy, but it's not true about all the other sites. And there's some evidence that in the vagina it's the opposite. So I accept the fact we don't know a lot of these questions, but and it's harder to change a really healthy gut microbiome than it is an unhealthy one. So in all the studies done, and that's why people with C. diff infection have a really sparse microbiome. They have hardly any species. Whatever you put into them, you're going to do them good. So the challenge is, how do we change a stable, quite diverse one and just shift it slightly? That's going to be harder, but I think we've got to start somewhere and realize that most people have a less than perfect microbiome, and that by giving people even just something as simple as doubling the fiber intake will produce more species, will produce more genes producing more beneficial microbes. And I'm not worried about culturing them. We've now, by DNA matching, have got about 85% of them identified. And so most of the common ones we do know about, and we can actually monitor what happens to these. And it's very hard to think of anything bad that can happen by doing these sort of approaches that I've said, cutting out antibiotics and increasing our diversity. Now, it's a one thing to go from all these studies that have shown diversity is bad and lack of diversity is good and lack of diversity is bad, to intervention studies in humans to show that. But we're just on the start of it. This is a very new science. We've just got the tools to do it. And hopefully, some of these ideas and these short-term interventions that we've been showing you have changed people's views about how by dramatically changing your diet, you can change your microbes. Okay, just shout when you've got the microphone. Go for it.
Hi. I just saying about variety in your diet, but how do you feel about vegetarianism and veganism?
Well, I tried it for a while. I tried being a vegan for 6 weeks. First week was all right, and then it got really tough, and I really missed my cheese. I didn't miss meat, but I really missed the cheese. And in my studies, I found that we did look at twins where one was vegetarian and one was not vegetarian, and followed their health and their other things. And we found only relatively minor differences between them. So I think it seemed to show us that if you had a sister who was a vegetarian or a vegan and you weren't, you still had some benefits. It was like there was something cultural about that those genes for healthiness or whatever were transmitted. It wasn't just the meat eating. So I think the benefits of vegetarianism have been exaggerated, and that's probably because many of the vegetarians in this country just eat chips or cheese omelettes or something. They're not necessarily, there can be so much, you can have a healthy meat eater who has a lot of salad and doesn't have starchy, unrefined carbs, and you can have an unhealthy vegetarian. So I think we need better terms for these. So my view is, although I now only eat meat about once a month, I did give it up completely, but then I got a bit of B12 deficiency, so I decided we're omnivores, we were meant to probably eat a little bit of meat, I should convert, and that's what I do in secret. But in a way, the only advantage of being vegetarian is generally not having meat on your plate allows you to put greater diversity of foods. So if you followed that premise, generally I'm a big fan.
Can I just ask, what happened about your experiment? What happened after your experiment from
Which one?
Being on the ski slopes and deciding that you didn't want to take all the medication?
Well, I lost 7 kilos, which I guess was good. This is during my various vegetarian, vegan phases and slowly changing over the time into my present diet. I managed to get off 2 of the medications, but I'm still taking a low-dose blood pressure tablet, amlodipine. Sorry about that. Didn't manage to get it off completely. Shout if you've got the microphone.
Hi. You touched on it slightly about how different people have gut microbes and that can cause them to be bigger or slimmer. But what about kind of the link between, have you discovered anything to do with mental health and kind of eating disorders or anything, like binge eating, bulimia, that kind of thing, in terms of gut microbes at all?
I haven't personally, but other people have studied this, and certainly there are big differences in anorectics and autistics. Not the same thing, but they both, interestingly, have funny diets and have very abnormal microbiomes. And the difficulty there is sorting out how much is cause and effect, how much is, I get asked a lot of questions from parents of autistic or Asperger's kids saying, how do I improve their diet because they refuse to change? They're very fixed in what they eat. They have a very non-diverse diet. And we know that if you increase the diversity of what you put in, you will get a more diverse microbes on the way out. But most of this stuff has been done in animals. There's a lot of good work on showing that anxiety and depression, as far as you can measure it in animals, and stress can be passed on from one animal to another through the microbiome. So I believe this explains why this whole gut feeling idea we have. And there's so much link between gut disorders and the brain, that the two are communicating all the time, not only with these chemicals like serotonin and GABA, but also through the vagus nerve. And I think we're still understanding how it's quite possible, it sounds crazy, but microbes could even be in tiny amounts in our blood that actually can go to our brain. Because when you cut the vagus nerve, you can still get some brain effects of microbes. So it's an ongoing field. We don't have that much human data, but we are seeing subtle differences in depressives and non-depressives. You've always got to worry about the drugs as well. We did a very worrying study recently showing that people who take PPIs, how many people here take PPIs? Proton pump inhibitors, omeprazole, for reflux and acidity. It's very common. And about 10% of the public take it, told there are no side effects. Well, it does really affect your gut microbes. Really shifts the populations from one part of the gut to another. They run away from that change in acidity. And that many other drugs do that. Metformin does that as well. So we're just learning some of these things as we go along. Next.
Thanks for that interesting views. Up here to your lecture, very interesting. You mentioned intermittent fasting, and I'm just wondering, wouldn't you need supplements or vitamins whilst you were fasting to maintain a healthy balance of microbes?
Intermittent fasting, no, because we're just talking at most 24 hours of a lower amount of calories. People, there's this sort of worry that the human body can't cope between breakfast and lunchtime without a Kit Kat. I think that's a British type of problem, because I worked in Spain for a while, and you realise that the average Spanish breakfast is an espresso and a coffee, and they have nothing to eat until about their lunch at about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and they're not fainting like we are. So I think we've got into this psyche that we can't cope with without these fasts. So we certainly don't need nutrition. If you're going on a prolonged fast, which I don't recommend, then maybe you need some nutrients. But the human body is designed to cope with long intervals without everything on tap. And this modern idea that we need to be drinking 3 litres of fresh spring mineral water every hour, otherwise our bodies won't cope, is madness. And these people who have to carry a bottle with them, otherwise they get headaches, is purely psychological. We're better designed than that. Obviously we've been designed to cope with thirst, to cope with a slight intermittent drop in these things. So we're much more robust than we give ourselves credit for.
You mentioned
Last couple of
you
questions.
weren't very much in favour of fish oils. I mean, given all the research, at least as far as I'm not a medic, but in the domain of how good it is for the overall body, joints and mental function, would you like to say some more about that, please? Yeah,
fish oils. So I used to take fish oils. Like everyone else, I said, was it, Lord Winston thinks it's good, for kids' brains. I tried to give my kid that stuff. He refused and was hiding it for a year under the kitchen table. But he was correct, because there's one thing to say there's an association between fish oil levels and some problem, and theoretically omega-3 is theoretically better antioxidant, anti-inflammatory in some laboratory system. But when you actually get to test it in humans, none of these fish supplements have stood up to any test of a clinical trial. They haven't improved any real symptom or disease. So we're stuck with these. It's a typical idea, but the whole, everyone's happy, the government doesn't pay for it, all these manufacturers make the stuff. Even if it did work, the stuff you're getting probably doesn't contain what it says it does, because the controls on it are so bad. A New Zealand study looked at 20 products, and 18 of them didn't have anything like what it said on the tin. We also have this ridiculous idea that one type of fish oil is good, one is bad. Omega-6 is now painted as bad. This is rubbish, and we just got to reassess all this stuff. If it hasn't been through a proper randomized trial in humans, basically it's likely to be nonsense. So I've stopped. Have some real fish instead. Won't kill you. It might actually, but there's too much mercury in it. Okay, one last question. The microphone, one last one.
Hello. This is just by way of an observation. You've said we've inherited our biome from a mother's birth canal. Well, of course, we've also inherited her mitochondria. And mitochondria, we're told, perhaps bacterial inclusions in cells. Have you any comments to make?
Well, I studied mitochondria for a couple of years. I think it has a small effect to play. I think it's a minor player in what we're doing. I think the volume of what these microbes are doing compared to the small percentage of mitochondrial genes compared to our own puts it into context. But just to remind people that as well as getting our microbes from our mother, you get them from your partner, you get them from whoever you live with, and you get them from your garden. If you're gardeners, you get a lot of extra good microbes by rubbing your hands in the soil and also not shaking off all the, not washing too thoroughly your organic vegetables from Abel & Co. and Riverford, etc. They've got plenty of microbes there that are probably good for you. Can't prove it, but they probably are. And also, those of you lucky enough to have a dog, make sure you keep stroking it because you'll be exchanging lots of healthy microbes with your dog. And that's one very good reason that most studies show that people with dogs are healthier than those without. So on that note, you've been a great audience. Thank you very much.